Project Hail Mary is one of the most surprising, heartfelt science fiction films of the last decade. It's a story that begins with isolation, unfolds through discovery, and transforms through friendship. Because beneath the astrophage, beneath the mission, beneath the breathtaking science fiction world, Project Hail Mary is asking a deeper question. What happens when fear becomes identity and love becomes courage? It's not a story about saving Earth. It's not a story about saving Arid. It's a story about saving each other. A story where friendship becomes transformation. A story where sacrifice becomes salvation. A story where courage isn't discovered, it's awakened. Grace wakes up alone, afraid, and convinced he's a coward. If you've ever felt like your past disqualified you, if you've ever believed fear defined you, if you've ever needed someone to remind you who you are, this episode is for you. This is Cinematic Scripture. I'm your host, Kyle Harless. Let's roll film. Set in a near-future world facing extinction, Project Hail Mary unfolds in a realm where humanity's survival depends on a single mission, and a single man who never wanted to be there. Ryland Grace wakes up alone, in space, with no memory, terrified, disoriented, and convinced he's not the hero Earth needs. And then he meets Rocky, an alien engineer from Arid, whose world is dying too, and together, they form one of the most beautiful friendships in modern science fiction. Here's the 5-sentence story structure. There's the world. Grace is a middle school science teacher who wakes up alone in space with no memory. The disruption, he learns Earth is dying from astrophage and he was forced onto a mission he never wanted. The action he takes, Grace and Rocky work together to find a solution, risking their lives to save both worlds. The opposition is time, technology, fear, Strat's control, and the ache of believing he's a coward. There's the new world. Grace chooses to save Rocky instead of returning home, finding courage, friendship, and a new life teaching children on Arid. So Project Hail Mary, it opens with disorientation. There's flashing lights, there's blurred edges, an upside-down camera flip. Ryland Grace is waking from a coma, and it's almost like he's being born for the first time. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know why he's alone. And the film uses a non-linear storytelling to reveal the truth slowly, memory by memory, ache by ache. We learn that Grace was a scientist who stood his ground, and he paid for it. His hypothesis, the one he defended fiercely, turned out to be wrong. So he's not just an outcast, he's humiliated. And he feels like a failure long before this mission even begins. He loves science, but he fears responsibility. He's terrified of going on the mission, and he's making excuses all throughout the film. He believes he's not brave enough, and he believed he wasn't brave enough. But Strat sedates him and then forces him into space. He doesn't volunteer. He doesn't choose courage. He was chosen, and he hates that truth. Grace doesn't believe he's brave. He believes he's a coward. But then Rocky enters the story. Rocky, who communicates through images and puppet shows. Rocky, who is afraid of being alone again. Rocky, who trusts Grace first. Rocky is the one who breaks his protective shell to save Grace. He's the one who gives up 6 years of fuel so Grace can get home. And it's Rocky who becomes the friend that Grace didn't know he needed. The film's emotional core is simple. 2 strangers, 2 worlds, 2 fears, 2 missions, 2 survivors, 2 friends. Grace's fear is dying. Rocky's fear is being alone. Grace's want in the film is to live. His need is to find a reason to be brave. And Rocky, he becomes that reason. In the film, it communicates through image. There's reflections, glass barriers, shadow and light, space circling the ship. Grace separated from everyone until he meets Rocky. If you've noticed, when you watch the film, Grace is always behind glass. He's always isolated. He's always watching others from a distance. He's in a glass box when he wakes. Carl watches him through the glass in the safe room. Grace communicates with Rocky through glass. His life is framed by separation until he chooses connection, until he chooses Rocky, until he chooses courage. So let's look at these characters a little bit deeper. So there's Ryland Grace. His desire is to survive. His need is to find courage through connection. But his fear, again, is dying, it's failing, it's being responsible. And his flaw is his cowardice that's rooted in his past wounds. Now his arc, he starts as, I'm not the right person, and he ends with, I will choose courage for someone I love. Grace doesn't become brave by discovering inner strength. He becomes brave by discovering someone worth being brave for. Then we have Rocky. Rocky's desire is to save Arid. His need is connection. He fears being alone again. His flaw is self-sacrifice that nearly kills him. Now his arc, beginning, he's a stranger behind glass. And at the end, he is a friend who risks everything for Grace. Now Rocky in this story, he is the mirror that Grace needs. He is the friend who sees courage in Grace long before Grace sees it in himself. Then we have Dr. Strat. Her desire is to save Earth at any cost, and her fear is failure. but she has a flaw, and it's control disguised as leadership. At the beginning of her arc, she's a no-nonsense commander. And by the end, she is a woman who sacrifices Grace without remorse. She is not an evil person per se. She is not heartless. They even have her sing karaoke on that ship to kind of like, there's some empathy, build some compassion, some camaraderie with her, but she is simply committed to survival. She is there to save the planet, and she is out simply for survival, even if it costs someone else's life. Now, I think there's a key scene in this film, and it's not just one moment. It's a hinge, a double beat. It's this cross-cut revelation where the film ties together Grace's internal crisis with Rocky's physical crisis, with Grace's memory versus Rocky's sacrifice, with the mission and with the theme. And so the film intercuts. We have Rocky nearly dying after breaking his protective shell. He destroys the one thing that's keeping him alive to shut down gravity and to save Grace. He sacrifices himself without hesitation. And then the other thing that it intercuts with is Grace remembering that he was sedated and forced onto the mission. He remembers his fear, his excuses, his failure, his cowardice, Strat's betrayal, and the truth that he's been avoiding. And these two beats collide both emotionally and thematically, because it's when these beats are happening, between Rocky giving himself to save Grace and Grace having this memory, he realizes that he wasn't brave, that's when he realizes he didn't volunteer for this mission. He didn't choose to go on it. He was forced. And it's where Rocky realizes that Grace is worth dying for. And this is the hinge of the entire narrative. Everything before this moment explains Grace, and everything after it transforms him, because it's in this moment that Grace sees the truth. He is not a coward. He is loved. He is needed. He is capable of courage. He is capable of sacrifice. He is capable of choosing someone else's life over his own. And what's beautiful is that he does. We see that Grace chooses to go back to save Rocky instead of going home. He chooses friendship over fear. He chooses love over survival. And he chooses courage over comfort. Grace chooses to be brave by the end of the film. And it all happens in this key moment where we see Rocky sacrifice and Grace come to the realization that he is a coward, but then from that moment on, he has changed. Now, Project Hail Mary, beautiful film, beautifully shot. Just overall, I think just technically, this is a very well done film. It doesn't just communicate through dialogue or speeches. It communicates through light and shadow, through reflection and glass and space and silence, and the fragile beauty of connection. Now, here's a few of the images that communicate in this film. So we have light. There's astrophage, which is both life and danger, right? It glows, it pulses, it illuminates, it threatens. And so they're afraid of it. It's killing them, but they need it. And so light becomes the symbol of both hope and extinction in this film. There's reflections, and they kind of communicate identity and isolation. Grace is he's reflected in glass a lot. Again, he is separated a lot in this film. I mentioned that already. He's alone. He's always watching himself. He's staring out into space. He's staring through glass. There's a reflection. This is until Rocky shows up. Now there's glass barriers. This is separation and trust. Grace wakes in a glass box. Carl watches him through a glass in a safe room. Grace and Rocky, they both begin separated by glass. They communicate through images. They slowly risk, they slowly trust, but it starts as separation, then it moves to trust. Grace taking off his helmet is the film's first act of courage. Rocky wants him to take it off because he's made oxygen for him. Grace doesn't believe him, but then to show that he trusts Rocky, he does take off the helmet. There's shadows and light, and this is fear and revelation. The ship is full of shadows. It's full of blurred edges, full of disorientation. And Grace's memory is like that too. It returns in darkness, and then as it's revealed, the truth emerges in light. And then there's the space circling the ship. The world is bigger than fear. The camera reminds us constantly in this film that Grace is small, that the mission is massive, that fear is real, that space is huge. But again, that courage is possible because he's out there alone doing it. Now the theme of this film, Project Hail Mary, deals with themes of courage, of fear, of sacrifice, and friendship. And the controlling idea of this film is this: courage emerges when you choose someone to be brave for. Grace doesn't become brave by discovering inner strength. He becomes brave by discovering Rocky. Fear becomes identity when you carry it alone. Courage becomes identity when you carry it with someone you love. We live in a world where fear quietly becomes identity, where responsibility feels overwhelming, where courage can feel out of reach, and where many of us long for someone to remind us of who we are. And we see that with Grace and Rocky. And here's what the characters misunderstand in this film. Grace believes that courage is something that strong people have, that his fear disqualifies him, that his past defines him, and that he is not the right person for the job. And these beliefs are his confusions, and they are what is holding him back. But the film actually reveals this beautiful biblical pattern beneath it, where we as people, we move at times from fear to isolation. Then there's this revelation, there's a sacrifice, and there's a new identity. There's a giving up of something, a sacrifice, and a new identity. Grace, again, he doesn't become brave by discovering inner strength. He becomes brave by discovering someone worth being brave for. The captain of the mission says that, like, you just have to find someone to be brave for. And Grace does in Rocky. Grace's discovery is the hinge of the entire narrative. Everything before it explains Grace, everything after it transforms him. So that's where we see him grow as a character. So the film asks, what happens when fear becomes identity and love becomes courage? And let's look at how Scripture responds to that question. Moses. First one we'll look at is Moses. Moses says, I'm not the right person. If you know the story, Moses is terrified of responsibility. He's in the desert. He's tending sheep. He killed an Egyptian. He fled from Egypt. And God comes and sees him, speaks to him through the burning bush. And he says, Moses, this is what I want you to do. And Moses says, I can't speak. I'm afraid. Send someone else to free your people from Egypt. Moses believes that his past disqualified him. He believes that his weakness, that he can't speak, that he's afraid that it defines him. And he believes he's not the right person, just like Grace in the film. But God gives Moses Aaron. He gives him a companion, someone to speak when Moses can't, someone to stand beside Moses, someone to help him carry courage. And in the film, we know that Grace gets Rocky, a companion, someone to speak through images, someone to stand beside him, someone to help him carry the courage. And I think this, like, courage is rarely found alone. And so we see that what happens with Grace and Rocky, we can mirror that to what Moses is going through. Just that fear. Like Grace is not the only one. There's stories in the Bible of people being like, nope, I'm not the guy for the job. And Moses is one of them. There's Peter, where we see courage come through love. All right. Peter is bold. He's such a bold guy until fear exposes him. All right. He sinks in the water, but man, he was brave getting in the water. He tells Jesus, I'm not going to deny you. But then he denies Jesus. He runs from responsibility. I mean, can you imagine denying Jesus 3 times after Jesus said, like, he's like, I won't deny you. And Jesus is like, no, you're gonna. And 3 times he does. He believes he's a failure, just like Grace does in the film. But when Jesus shows up after the resurrection, he cooks Peter breakfast. He doesn't ask him, Peter, are you strong? Are you brave? Are you finally ready? He asks Peter, do you love me? And Peter says yes. And Christ actually asks him that 3 times. And love becomes the courage that drives Peter. Peter becomes brave because he loves Jesus. Grace becomes brave in the film because he loves Rocky. All right, I'm not throwing what's happening on the film onto Scripture. I'm just saying there's these parallels. We see this when we actually read Scripture's story. Love can transform fear into action. There's the character Ruth, right? In the book of Ruth, she chooses someone else's life. Ruth's whole world collapses. All right, her father-in-law dies, her husband dies, her brother-in-law dies. It's just her future disappears. Her identity is shaken. She is now widowed, and she has every reason to choose safety, to go back to her home, but she instead chooses to go with Naomi. She says, where you go, I will go. She chooses someone else's survival over her own. And Grace does the same. He chooses Rocky's survival over his own. He chooses friendship over fear, and he chooses sacrifice over safety. And this love that Ryland Grace carries for Rocky, it becomes the birthplace of courage in this film. Let's go back to, we looked at Peter, but let's look at Jesus. It's the love that makes even cowards brave. Project Hail Mary is a story about a man who believes fear defines him until love awakens, until courage shows up that he didn't know he had. Scripture knows this story so well because Jesus, he steps into a world full of people who are exactly like Ryland Grace. We doubt ourselves. We fear responsibility. We run from calling. We believe our past disqualifies us. We think courage belongs to someone else. And what's incredible is that Jesus, he doesn't show up with strength necessarily. He shows up with love. Jesus shows up with compassion and caring and helping the hurting and the broken. Scripture actually says in 1 John 4, perfect love casts out fear. And Jesus is the embodiment of love. God is love, and Christ is God incarnate. He is God in the flesh, and so he is love. It's not effort. It's not performance. It's not inner resolve. It is love. And so the way that Christ's love compels others to love him. Grace in this film becomes brave because Rocky loves him, because Rocky trusts him, because Rocky needs him. Grace sees that because Rocky sacrifices himself to save Grace, and that love is what transforms Grace. And we become brave as Christ loves us, as he calls us, as he carries us. Where Grace risks his life for Rocky, Jesus gives his life for us. Where grace awakens courage through friendship, Jesus awakens courage through love. Where grace believes he's not the right person, Jesus chooses people who feel that exact same way. Moses said, send someone else. Peter said, I don't know him. Paul said, I'm the worst of sinners. And Jesus said, follow me. Not because they were strong, but because his love would make them brave. Jesus is the one who meets us in our fear, our failure, our isolation, and our ache. And Jesus is the one who says, you don't have to be courageous first. My love will make you courageous. See, friends, grace doesn't return home. He doesn't reclaim his old life. He doesn't become the hero Earth wanted. He becomes the hero that Rocky needed. He becomes a teacher again, but this time he teaches courage. He teaches children on Arid. He teaches the next generation. He teaches the story he lived. Courage is found when you choose someone to be brave for. That's what Grace teaches every day he gets up and teaches those kids. So let's look at the story lens. As we look at Project Hail Mary, is the main theme redemptive? I would say yes, absolutely. Courage emerges through sacrificial friendship. That is the theme of this film. Courage emerges through sacrificial friendship. And man, of course that's redemptive. That's beautiful picture of Scripture. What realm is the story set in? Well, it's a story of transition. Grace moves from cowardice to courage and from isolation to connection. The world around him is dying, and then it is saved because of him. So it's not in the realm of darkness, it's in the realm of transition from darkness to light, both the world around him and he himself. Does the film communicate truth or lies? The film communicates truth, yes. That fear isolates us, absolutely it does. Fear separates us. That love transforms us, and that courage emerges through connection. Absolutely courage emerges through connection, and love transforms. It does communicate truth, it's beautiful. And so I'm sitting here, as the credits roll, I'm sitting with this story, and I'm like, man, that was awesome. Like, that is such a good movie. Ryan Gosling just kills it as Ryland Grace. He's funny. He's charismatic. You care about him. Rocky is a fun side character. I think the film is just so well told. But as I sit there as the credits roll, I also think about the themes of this film, and I'm stuck by how often we define ourselves by our past or by fear. Grace, again, he believed he was a coward. He believed his past disqualified him. He believed he wasn't the right person. But courage doesn't come from strength. And it didn't for Grace. It came from love. Courage came from love. Rocky saw courage in Grace long before Grace ever saw it himself. And friends, Jesus does the same for us. He meets us in our fear, our failure, our isolation, and our ache. And he says, you don't have to be courageous first. My love will make you courageous. Christ saw us when we didn't want to see ourselves. Scripture says that God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that in our sinfulness, Christ, while we were sinners, Christ died for us. He saw in us what we can't see in ourselves. To restore us, to bring courage out of us through love. So Project Hail Mary, this film, it leaves us with a world where fear can become identity, but where love becomes courage, where sacrifice becomes salvation, and ultimately friendship becomes transformation. Grace doesn't return home. He enters a new world, a world that is shaped by connection, a world that is shaped by courage, and a world that is shaped by love. And the world he leaves with us is a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is the presence of love. So how do we respond as we watch this film? We step out of confusion and we choose connection. We step out of fear and we choose love. We choose courage. We choose to leave the story we are telling ourselves and enter the story that Jesus is telling us. When we let Project Hail Mary and the gospel speak together, we hear the film ask, what happens when fear becomes identity and love becomes courage? In the gospel of Jesus Christ, it responds, perfect love casts out fear. Grace finds courage through Rocky, we through Christ. If you're a Christian storyteller, a writer, a filmmaker, a pastor, a teacher, content creator, or communicator, and you want to share scripture, culture, and human stories as one unified story, but you're not sure how, friends, you don't need more theology. You don't need more writing workshops. You don't need more content. You need to see the story structure that's beneath scripture, culture, and humanity. Most Christians know the Bible is true, but they don't know how to read it as a unified story. And when you can't see the story, you can't communicate it clearly. That's why I created the See the Story Masterclass. It's a live 90-minute experience where I'll teach you how to see the structure of scripture, interpret the ache of cultural stories, name the ache of humanity in stories, reveal Christ through narrative, disciple through story instead of principles, and communicate with clarity, depth, and creative excellence. If you're ready for clarity, coherence, and confidence in your storytelling, and you want to communicate Christ clearly through narrative, join me for See the Story Masterclass. You can grab your seat at cinematicscripture.com. I'll link it in the description below. I hope to see you there. Until next time, I'm Kyle. This is Cinematic Scripture. Watch attentively, reflect spiritually, and lead from story. I'll see you next time.